So, Bill de Blasio, when I think of you of late, I think of this scene in Jerry Maguire where Jerry Maguire has like lost all of his clients except for one. And Cuba Gooding says to him, "You're loving me now." And I feel like New York is now belatedly loving you, having gone through Eric Adams and having a mayor's race dominated in part by Andrew Cuomo. I feel like there's like a retrospective about your time as mayor. And so I want to start there by asking, how does that feel? What do you think people perhaps got wrong about your mayoral administration when it was happening, and what you think perhaps they're realizing now?
I don't want to overstate it, but I feel like there's a recognition that we were dealing with the thing that everyone feels now. They feel affordability. They feel in this city, like it's harder and harder to live here. And that's what I was trying to act on. And I think in retrospect, I've had a lot of people come up to me and say thank you, whether it was for pre-K for all or 3K for all, both for the good of their kids, but also because it put a lot of money back in their pocket. And, childcare is astoundingly expensive around here. I have people come up to me and say thank you for rent freeze, or thank you for, affordable housing that they got into, or paid sick days, whatever it may be. So the whole idea was to fight income inequality and make life affordable for working people. And I may not have been the best vessel or communicator at all times, but I think the work is standing the test of time, and people are feeling it now, what it meant for them. And yeah, in times they're feeling the absence.
The affordability question is at the center of the New York mayor's race, and I want to get to that, because I think that speaks to a concern that whether you live in New York or you live anywhere else, that is the central daily challenge across the country. For those who don't live in New York, they're probably nonetheless hearing a lot about the New York mayor's race. And I want to start with a kind of a top line question, which is, why do these New York mayor's races seem to grab so much national attention beyond the fact that it's the national media capital? I do think there's something about these particular races and that particular office that is unlike any other in the country. And I'd be curious from you, somebody who was the mayor, why that is, and not only why that is, but what kinds of responsibilities it puts to a mayor in that job.
Back in the 1960s, and I guess the era of John Lindsay, the job was called the second toughest job in America. And having done it, it may well be true. It's an extraordinarily difficult, everything is controversial by its nature in New York. Almost 9 million people, the most diverse place on earth. I always say I represented 9 million highly opinionated people. I mean, it's just, we are passionate, intense people. But beyond that, I think it's the greatest city in the world by, the numbers, clearly the biggest and most influential city in America. The election's an off year. That's important, when we have our elections, when there's not as much going on politically in the country, and then it becomes a bit of a bellwether. And then often the figures who become New York City mayor loom large in the national discussion. So I think there's a lot of factors. But what's really powerful this year is this mayor's race is picking up right where November left off. November, in retrospect, was about affordability. And I'm a Democrat, and I'm a progressive, and I love my party, but I have a huge critique of what happened in November. And
yeah,
how
tell
we
us
about it.
Tell us.
Well, we didn't speak to the central issue. And I think what's happening here, I mean, I'll compare sort of in reverse. Here, you have candidates laser focused on affordability. And the three, look, I'll level set right up front, David. Anybody but Cuomo. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. The one thing I say publicly that's definitive in my position is do not rank Andrew Cuomo, leave him off your ballot. There are a number of good and decent candidates. By the way, not a one of them has a scandal to their name or any corruption in the background, which is a beautiful thing. Three that are particularly prominent, no particular order, just three who are particularly prominent and accomplished and visionary, in my view, Adrian Adams, Brad Landers, Orhan Mamdani, all of them have run campaigns that are both positive and focused on affordability and speak to the lives of everyday people. Not accidentally, Orhan and Adrian come from Queens. Brad comes from Brooklyn. They're speaking to the lives, almost 7 million plus New Yorkers live in the outer boroughs. They're speaking to the lived experience of working people, which is how tough it is to make ends meet. So they're talking about childcare. Orhan's talking about free buses, which I think is right on the money. Everyone's talking about childcare. They're talking about affordable housing. Meanwhile, Cuomo wants the election to be about crime. And he wants to paint this Gotham City-like, Batman-like picture of, city on the edge and about to collapse, like some movie from the 1970s. But that's not what everyday people are feeling. They're feeling affordability. Well, now let's step back to October, November 2024. I was out in Michigan. I was campaigning for Kamala Harris all over Michigan. You could, it was jumping off the page how much people were feeling the inflation, the impact of COVID still in their lives, in the aftermath, the fact that for 40 years, working people have been going backwards in this country, not forwards. All of that was coming to a head. And neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris spoke to that with the kind of empathy and sharpness and clear, meaningful proposals that could have put the lie to Donald Trump. Donald Trump sounded more pissed off about the status quo than our Democratic leaders did, even though Donald Trump was only going to create tax giveaways for the wealthy and corporations and make the status quo worse. He sounded pissed off, and he talked about affordability and inflation all the time. Well, I think it's something we should actually feel good about, that the leading progressive candidates in the New York City mayor's race, that's what they're focused on, affordability and what people are going through at their kitchen tables every night trying to make ends meet. And if all Democrats would do that, we would be in a hell of a lot better shape.
You mentioned Andrew Cuomo, so let's talk a little bit about him. I want to ask first about how he is even a competitive force in this race. We have done a lot of reporting on Andrew Cuomo, the nursing home situation, the immunity for nursing homes, and he got lots of money from the healthcare lobby. This is during the COVID situation. That's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he has a sexual harassment scandal, all sorts of corruption scandals, some that have gone all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. He resigned in disgrace. All of a sudden, he is back, and he is polling obviously competitively, if not the front runner, then certainly competitively. This is a guy who has more corruption and ethics scandals and problematic behavior than perhaps any politician in America, other than Donald Trump.
Correct.
And he is a competitive force in a New York City mayor's race, a city that arguably he hasn't really even lived in. I'm curious what you take from that. Like, what does that mean about Democratic politics, about American politics?
So the last piece really needs to be focused on. He hasn't lived in New York City in a real way. He just showed up, obviously, the last few months in a luxury apartment, no less, in Manhattan. But he hasn't lived in New York City for over 30 years. And he doesn't understand life in New York City. I was constantly frustrated as mayor trying to explain to him the biggest city in his own state. He thinks it's still like the 1980s or something in New York City. So that's the first problem, because that directly informs why he thinks everything should be about crime and can't really speak meaningfully to the affordability crisis, because it has no personal resonance for him. In terms of the bigger point you make, there's only one parallel. It's Donald Trump. They are so similar, it is stunning. It's not that they're just both from Queens and came up in that same era. Both were sort of forged in the 1980s. They both practice a politics that's full of vindictiveness, bullying, trying to muscle rather than ever seeking consensus. You could say, well, oh, that's just politics, right? Or that's just leadership. The problem is with Cuomo, like with Trump, it's about their own political needs and their own ego, and that's where everything ends. There's no moral structure. I think sometimes people conflate Mario Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo in that sense. Mario Cuomo had a moral structure. Mario Cuomo was extremely courageous on issues like the death penalty. Andrew Cuomo doesn't have a moral structure. It's just about his endless quest to be president of the United States and to outdo his dad. That's what this is about. And so just like we could say with Trump, obviously whatever Trump's dad did to him and whatever happened in that relationship created a certain ego dynamic that plays out negatively for all of us every day. A lot of that is true in a different variation with Cuomo. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't have been possible for Donald Trump to come back from felony conviction, everything he did to women ever, January 6, 2021. He shouldn't have been able to come back from any of that. Ironically, people in the Cuomo camp will say, I've heard them say off record, they took solace, they took inspiration from Donald Trump coming back from all that. They particularly noted that Donald Trump had a horrible history of harassing women, but was able to convince people to look past it. So they reasoned that reality and what they saw as the decline of the Me Too movement and the sense that among some that movement went too far, that they could use all of that as their fulcrum for a comeback and sort of cleanse him, because no one was going to make a big enough issue of the fact that he harassed 13 different women, according to the United States Department of Justice, under Joe Biden. Let's be clear, under his own party's administration. They reasoned that people didn't want to talk about COVID anymore. So the fact that he sent seniors to their death in nursing homes, and there was an effort to cover up the truth and the numbers while trying to get a book deal to make himself famous so he could run for president. All of that, they reasoned people would look away, because they were so afraid of crime, or they wanted a experienced leader, or maybe he could convince them that the best person to take on Trump was someone like Trump. And I'll tell you, I've had people say to me about, their friends, their neighbors, like some people saying, oh, we need a tough guy to take on a tough guy, or we need a thug to take on a thug. That's the most dangerous backwards theory in the world. That's how a lot of the most evil people in history got their foot in the door. So, that explains, in my view, part of why he was able to make a play of it, that theory is what fueled them. And then tragically, in my view, all the attention on Washington, all the attention on Trump has given less opportunity for people to really examine Cuomo's record and see how bad it is. I do not feel like the media or the political class has done a good job of vetting. I think a lot of people in the political class have been cowardly, and they hear his voice again. They live in fear of him, as they always do. And he head fakes well. He's convinced everyone it's inevitable, so they go running to him. But as you were noting, the polls say something a little different. He started out clearly with better name recognition than anyone else. That fueled him for a long time. Now, the situation's getting a lot more interesting, because first you saw Zoran Mondani go from almost nowhere to, nearly competitive with Cuomo. Brad Lander has come up much stronger in the last few days. And obviously this horrible situation that we're now seeing with him being arrested by ICE agents. A lot of people are going to see that and appreciate Brad's courage. This thing's evolving by the hour. And it's almost like there was so little attention on the election for months, and now it's super, super concentrated. So it literally feels like hour by hour. Bernie Sanders just came in for Zoran. That's going to be a big impact. What happened with Brad and the arrest is going to be a big impact. The fact that more and more people are questioning Cuomo is going to have an impact. He still has his strengths, but this is a very live election now.
Well, I think your point about this attitude among some Democrats, or at least the assumption among some Democrats, that we need our own Trump, that Trump is the not a cautionary tale. Trump is like a model for what the Democrats need. And Andrew Cuomo, I do think it's fair to say, well, it's Andrew Cuomo or Rahm Emanuel are in the running for the two Trumpiest Democratic politicians, in my view.
I think I have differences with Rahm, but I don't think he's anywhere near Andrew's level.
Okay, all right. Well,
I just want to say that
for sure. We're debating degrees. That's my view, not yours. But I think you're right. It is really, really dangerous that Trump not being a cautionary tale, Trump being a guidebook, essentially, among some Democratic voters who understandably want Trumpism confronted,
right?
But but I think you're right. Like the idea that a Trump is the best, a Trumpish character is the best way to confront Trump is extremely, extremely problematic. And I would also say this, and I want your reaction to it, which is this idea of Andrew Cuomo being a tough guy. I mean, it seems to me that Andrew Cuomo, one of the through lines through his career has been not really being much of a tough guy when it comes to the people
Yes.
who have lots of power, that like donors. I mean, he is the beneficiary of like all the comic book supervillain money in this race. I think it was, you know, the landlords, the ride share companies, et cetera, like all the bad guys in the comic book are behind Andrew Cuomo, in my view, because they know he's a tough guy that in standing up
Correct.
for them. He's not a tough guy against them. And I know you ran into some clashes with him over some of those things. Like, for instance, in New York, for those who don't know, the governor has a lot of power over the city. So the mayor can want to do, you know, X, Y, and Z, but has to go to the governor on something like a millionaire's tax and the like. I mean, talk to us about perhaps some of the clashes that you had with Andrew Cuomo, where he really wasn't a tough guy against the people who have the power.
Well, let's begin with where my kind of break with him began. You know, he and I had for years a good relationship. I even worked for him once upon a time when he was HUD secretary in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I thought highly, he's a skilled guy, he's an intelligent guy, and when he puts his mind to something, he can get some good stuff done. That's all true. But what I found over the years was more and more of a proclivity to lie, just very comfortably lie. And exactly what you said, David, that he put his energy into backing up the status quo. He put his energy into doing the bidding of those who are already rich and powerful. And, you know, it was thinly guised, and it wasn't even populist rhetoric. It was sort of thinly guised in the rhetoric of, you know, doing the public's good. But in the end, the more you watched, the more it became obvious he's always been backed by huge amounts of corporate money, real estate money, the wealthy in this town. He literally, one of the first acts he did as governor, he went after the union movement in this state, and he came up with this committee that raised $20 million, all anonymous. I think it was called the Committee to Save New York, or some wonderfully euphemistic, messed up title. And like the first act of the drama was him shepherding the resources of the rich and powerful to affront working people. And that's been the model over and over. So when I went to him in 2014, I won that election for mayor in 2013 with 73% of the vote in this wildly diverse place. 73% of the votes should mean something. And the number one thing I stood for was a tax on the wealthy to fund pre-K for all. So every single child, regardless of background, regardless of income, anything, would get full day quality pre-K for free. And I went to him and I said, hey, how can we make this happen? And the first conversation, he's like, we're not going to do that. That's impossible. And I said, okay, tell me why. And his reasoning was, oh, you know, it's a high tax state and we shouldn't do more taxes. And I said, well, I don't want to tax everyone in the state. I just want to tax New York City residents who make higher incomes, not everyone, only high incomes, millionaires and above. And it's a very small amount to pay for kids to go to pre-K, which is in everyone's interest, right? It's for the good of the city, the business community, to help get them a better workforce in the future, all these nice things. And he's like, no, there's no way. And I said, again, if all we want to do is tax our own wealthy people, you could just put it on me, blame me. He's like, nope, no new taxes on the wealthy. So I said, okay, that could be your position. My position will be the one that 73% of the people in New York City just voted for me to pursue. So let's just go and have a nice fair fight in the legislature. You defend your position, I'll defend my position, and let's see what happens. He's like, no, you can't do that. I'm the governor, you can't do that. I'm like, of course I can do it. People voted for me to do it. So that's what happened. And he thought it was disdainful that I was defending the very platform I ran on. Well, what happened in the end, the reason we got pre-K for all in New York City, in addition to a Democratic state assembly that did stand up vibrantly for it, energetically, We had a Republican state Senate propped up by conservative Democrats, supported by Andrew Cuomo, to make sure that he always had a Republican majority in the state Senate so he would not have to act on progressive initiatives. Even those conservative Democrats started to feel the heat from the grassroots in their own districts, and they didn't want to vote against pre-K for all. And they went to Cuomo and said, you can't make us do this. And so his compromise was to find the money equivalent of what the tax would have raised, find it within the state budget and give it to us.
And
in the end,
yeah, that's a big victory.
It's a big victory. It wasn't exactly the one I wanted, but it's still, we achieved the goal for kids, and it's been an incredible success. Couldn't be more proud of how effective pre-K for all has been. And then that sparked pre-K for all as our next move to reach 3-year-olds. But here's the point, David. He had incredible energy for defending the interests of the wealthy. And so your point before, he was tough on behalf of the wealthy and the powerful. But does he go to bat against them on behalf of working people? Is he courageous in that sense? Is he tough? Is he, the thug for the working guy? The exact opposite. He is the best friend the status quo ever had. And if you look at what he's saying now, he's trying to distract everyone away from the affordability question by telling them, we're in this horrible deathscape and only he can save us from crime and disorder. I must say, aided and abetted now by the New York Times editorial board, painting the same picture and denying the extent of the affordability crisis, which is its own story, how this elitist paper could act like people in New York City are not suffering every day with prices they can't afford. I mean, it's just like a clear advertisement for the status quo trying to defend its own interest and trying to distract people from the thing they're living every moment and the fact that they need new leaders and they need new ideas. And I'm your poster child. I'm your case study here. They said, including the New York Times, pre-K for all was a pipe dream. It was impossible. It was some liberal or progressive dreamscape that would never happen. Except it did happen. And these other ideas can happen if we're willing to do something different to address what's wrong in our city.
Well, and you to your point about the sort of media and political establishment, I mean, the number of Democratic politicians, as an example, who said Cuomo needs to resign, who are now, when he was governor, who now say, who endorsed him for mayor. You've got Mike Bloomberg, the billionaire behind Cuomo. You've got, as I said, the landlord lobby, the rideshare lobby, now the New York Times. I mean, it really is. It really does feel like a comic book situation where you've got like the supervillain and all the Legion of Doom behind him, and you've got these other candidates who are competitive. And so that raises a question of the other candidates that you mentioned, who are campaigning in a very different way from Andrew Cuomo, on very different promises, on very different pledges. I look at this from outside, and I say, it's amazing that they're able to be competitive when the Legion of Doom is so aggressively trying to buy this race. And one thing that I've come upon, we did this audio series called Master Plan about the legalization of corruption in America, the legalization of the buying and selling of policy, the buying and selling of elections. New York, known historically as one of the most corrupt cities and states in the country, which is really saying a lot. But it has a public financing system of elections when it comes to candidates running for office. And it seems to me, looking at this race, the fact that this race is even competitive now in the polls, with candidates campaigning in the way on the affordability issue in a way that oligarchs don't like, and the oligarchs are behind the Legion of Doom is behind Andrew Cuomo. The fact that it's competitive seems to be, no matter what necessarily happens in the election, a reminder to folks who are sick and tired of corruption across the country that actually every single election doesn't have to be an uncompetitive coronation of the person with the money. That there actually is. It's not a perfect solution, but there is a way to restore a bit of democracy, even in a place that has had such rampant corruption. Do you agree with that? And do you think the public financing of candidates, I mean, it seems like a really arcane thing, but do you feel like it's a game changer here?
Oh my God, yes. So there's a couple of different pieces I want to pull out of what you said. First, on public financing, my administration, we sponsored a referendum to make it stronger. Now it's an 8-to-1 match. This is a model that can be applied at any locality, city, county, state, and the country. 8-to-1 match.
Explain what that means to somebody who doesn't understand it.
Any New York City resident, if they give $10 or more, up to $250, that donation is matched 8-to-1. So let's say a resident can only give $10 to a mayoral candidate. There's an $80 match that the public provides, the public treasury provides to that candidate. And the idea is that a candidate can, and we have very clear, by the way, we have very clear donation limits, we have very clear spending limits. So a candidate could run even for mayor of the biggest city in the country and never speak to a single big donor. They could just raise the money at the grassroots. A $250 donation, for example, gets a $2,000 match. So that's pushing you into big donor territory. But it starts with the average person doing something that then expands in its impact. So the notion here is when you make it accessible, and this, I would never, ever have been elected without a matching funds program. It was less generous when I ran, but still substantial. No way in hell I would have been 8 years as mayor of New York City and given us things like pre-K for all if it weren't for matching funds. So we put in this even better version in my administration, 8-to-1 match. And what happened? A city council that historically had been highly disproportionate in terms of gender, male dominated, for the first time ever in the election of 2021 became majority women. Like instantaneous change in terms of actual representation, because matching funds opened up the system and allowed people to run who would have been excluded before, allowed them to be viable when they wouldn't have been before. So that's that. On the question of what progressives are showing on the ground, it's striking. Look, I was able to win in New York City. New York Times was against me. The other editorial boards were against me. The business community, the real estate community, they were all against me. The party structures, Democratic Party structures were against me. I won without a runoff. That was before ranked choice voting. I won without a runoff because I was able to speak to people about the tale of two cities, fighting inequality, affordability, et cetera, and they cared, and they made their decision. So it didn't matter that all this money and power was arrayed against me. Chicago, you've got a mayor from the progressive side of the spectrum. Los Angeles, you've got a progressive mayor who also had to beat a self-funding candidate who spent an immense amount of money and had huge advantages. Three biggest cities in the country, examples all from just the last few years. So we see lots of progressive mayors and other local officials around this country who have beaten the odds and certainly have beaten the big money. So, I think what's happening at this point, David, is I think the public is wise to this. I think they are smart about who's trying to dominate these elections with money. I mean, when Michael Bloomberg came out of nowhere and said he's giving $5 million to Andrew Cuomo, I tweeted out now that this is Michael Bloomberg trying to buy his fourth mayoral election because he bought the previous three for himself. And he never would have won if he hadn't spent immense amounts, over $100 million per election. Insane in a city like this. So I think that is having an impact on the public psyche. And I think the fact is that less well-financed but real progressive candidates are winning regularly because people don't want big money in politics. Not just Democrats, not just progressives. Independents don't want big money in politics. Even Republicans, when you poll Republicans, and put aside MAGA and all, they actually don't want big money in politics.
Let me ask the question about
part of how we make a bigger change, I think.
Let me ask the question about some of the mayors that you mentioned. I mean, the conservative would look at the mayor of Chicago and say he's at very low in the polls. Karen Bass, there were criticisms about the wildfires. There was obviously you were subjected to daily criticism by the media and the political class. These are all different situations, but it's basically the conservative argument is that progressive mayors, not just Democrats, but progressive or left left-leaning mayors have either a competence issue or they can't get stuff done. I mean, we've seen this thrown at some of the candidates in the New York mayor's race, this idea that they're going to bankrupt the city, they don't know how to run anything, they don't have any experience. I think my question on this is, setting aside what's true, what's not true in those arguments, it is clear that when a not establishment-backed candidate gets into office, there is typically an effort by the political class, certainly by the corporate class and the media class, to destroy that candidate, especially at the municipal level, to make a cautionary tale out of that candidate winning. And I think the question then becomes, if one of those candidates in New York wins this election, what are they going to have aligned against them? And what are some tips from your experience about how to navigate that situation? Because they are mayor, they still need to get things done, right? You go from campaigning against things to actually trying to do things. And there's an argument that when you're trying to do things, look, you need parts of the business community. You need parts of different stakeholders to be with you, even if you were campaigning against some of the effects of what they had been doing in the past. So what are your tips for avoiding what oftentimes happens to anti-establishment candidates when they get in?
You know, the first thing I want to say to lead in is, you're right that you can just set your watch by the fact that a progressive comes into office as an executive, and immediately it'll be, oh, they're not competent, and oh, you know, they don't know how to run anything. You're going to get that. You could be the best manager in the world, you're still going to get that. Karen Bass, I mean, a lot happened around the fires, and a lot of it was beyond anyone's control. But before that, one of the most notable things was she was actually getting something done on reducing homelessness. And her predecessors, you know, certainly her immediate predecessor was much more moderate than her. But she managed to move the needle. And equally, when I came into office, we reduced crime for 6 years in a row while ending stop and frisk. You know, we added a whole new grade to the public schools and then began to add another one with 3K. I mean, these are, it's like, what do you got to do to get attention around here, right? I mean, like,
right.
So
right.
I think, you know, it's just funny. And again, the New York Times would lead the charge on this, you know, quote unquote competence issue, but not seem to note when something was happening that was actually reaching working people. When we did paid sick days, we reached 500,000 workers who didn't have coverage, for example. Or when we gave contracts to city workers who went for 4 years without a contract with Michael Bloomberg and therefore were not getting paid the level they deserved. You know, we did these things and the city kept moving forward. We kept adding jobs.
I would ask, how much buy-in did you have to get on any of these policies with different stakeholders who perhaps weren't with you in the election, but knew they had to work with you? I'm like, you know, parts of the business community, parts of, you know, any of the stakeholders that progressives are typically not branded to, if you will. How much buy-in do you have to get from them? And what are the buy-in opportunities where those sides, essentially capital and labor, can work together?
There's always the possibility to work together. I want to emphasize that. You know, I was tough on the real estate community, for example, but a lot of folks in the real estate community, to their credit, if you drove a hard bargain with them, but you still find a way to make it viable, they would learn to live with it. We had what's called mandatory inclusionary housing. We said, you know, constantly folks in the development world wanted to build higher, to build bigger, denser. I personally didn't have a problem with that if I got enough affordable housing in the deal. That was my bottom line. I wanted affordable housing for working people. We could come to an understanding and get that done. So there's plenty of examples like that I think it's exactly the flip of the equation you were pointing out earlier with Cuomo. If the powers that be, the wealthy, the corporations, the real estate folks, all know you're in the tank for them, they're not going to demand anything.
Right.
They're going. I mean, they're. I should say it better. They are going to. You're not. If you're not demanding of them, they are going to go on with business as usual. Okay.
Right.
If they know you will challenge them, and you have power to back it up, and you have the people on your side, they have to deal with that. So in the end, the folks who had the wealth and power in this city, in this state, knew they could depend on Cuomo not to ruffle their feathers. But they came to understand that I would demand a lot of them, but I'd try in the end to be what I thought was fair, and we could get somewhere together. They didn't always like it, but we could get somewhere. My job wasn't to win a popularity contest with the rich and powerful. My job was to defend the interests of New York City and the people of New York City. So I think the whole point here is, if you show them that you'll be tough, and in fact, we do have power in the public sector. This is something I think is fundamentally misunderstood. Private sector in many parts of the country, maybe not all, but in many parts of the country, they cannot get done what they want to get done without having to some extent to accommodate the needs of the public sector. That you can't just like build things in most parts of the country without getting permits, without having to follow the zoning laws, whatever it may be. So the public sector holds an immense amount of power if we're willing to use it. And so what I found is, when I wanted to do pre-K for all, you could say, well, they can stop you with all their power. Well, not if the people were with me. The people created such a dynamic that, even as I said, Republican-leaning state senators felt fearful to vote against pre-K for all, right? With the things we did, like paid sick days, that was between me and our city council. We had a progressive majority in our city council. They couldn't do anything about it. They could say the sky was going to fall if you give working people paid sick days. They couldn't stop us. So, I think there's almost an underestimation of the power that a progressive office holder can have once they get to office, if they are willing to use the muscle and go to the people. And this now gets to these candidates that we have. And I think what's really great, as I said, you've got capable public servants running, no scandals, no baggage. They've all worked in public service, and they all come from the grassroots in different ways. Now, with that kind of profile, you can inspire people to get on your side. So take an obvious example. Some in the status quo have attacked Zoran Mamdani for wanting free buses. Free
Right,
buses.
which should be like, just as an aside, the idea that this is some radical idea is so deranged and crazy, and it's like the sky is falling, the city will go bankrupt if we have fare free buses in a city that has a fare free ferry to Staten Island. Which he has pointed out, but like the overwrought reaction to something as basic as this is like a tell, right? It's like it really says something about how afraid of any change the status quo and the establishment really, how afraid they are.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, free buses, free public buses is something we're seeing in different parts of the United States, different parts of the world. Why? Because there's a lot of advantages. It's because if it gets more and more people into mass transit, it's good in terms of fighting pollution and climate problems. It's good in terms of reducing congestion. It addresses the income and inflation challenges people are dealing with. Obviously, there's no fare evasion question if you have free buses. It's a perfectly legitimate idea. You can argue it. You can argue the cost of it versus other things you might want to spend money on, but it's not illegitimate. An idea like that will take a leader who can capture the public imagination, build support, whether it's required in the city council, state legislature, whatever it is. Now, whether you're talking, again, I'm highlighting the three, I think, leading progressive alternatives: Adrian Adams, Brad Lander, and Zoran Mamdani. All of them, I think, could go to our state capital in Albany. And thank God they will not have the same situation that I had, because the reign of the Republican State Senate ended because people rebelled against Andrew Cuomo. They rebelled because of Donald Trump coming into office, and they one by one, voted out all of those conservative Democrats who were siding with the Republicans. So now we have a solid Democratic majority in our state Senate, and it's been sustained. And we had almost a half century where that wasn't possible, but it happened in the last few years. So any New York City mayor now can go to a state Senate that they can at least have some good faith opportunity to get support from. Same with the Democratic Assembly. So now you turn to the governor. Kathy Hochul is about as night and day in style and approach from Andrew Cuomo as you could possibly imagine. I don't have to agree with her on every issue to say I always found her reasonable. I always found her open. She is not vindictive. She is not a bully. She is a Democrat. She's a Democrat who actually remembers she's a Democrat. So, a mayor of New York City can go up there now and get a fair shake for the people of the city. Right. And that's a big change. So if one of these progressive candidates can prevail, they'll actually have, in many ways, a much easier time than I had getting things done.
I want to ask that you mentioned zoning. There's been this debate about the future of the Democratic Party between, I guess you'd call it, the populist anti-oligarchy folks, the so-called abundance folks. I think people have basically tuned in to this. If you're following, what should Democrats do? And the abundance folks basically say, and I'm generalizing here, that the problem is that there's too much red tape, there's too many regulations. The road to good intention, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That liberal do-gooders have made it too hard for anything to be built, affordable housing and the like, environmental reviews and the like. That liberals are just loading up the development and building process with things that may have good intentions but are slowing things down, and that's the real problem. The anti-oligarchy folks say the real problem when it comes to building things, to creating prosperity, is that the corporate folks, the oligarchs, are the ones who enjoy and get rich off of essentially shortages, scarcity. You having been in a city where these decisions, these challenges are dealt with every day. Like, I realize it's not necessarily always an either or, but I'm curious just your take on, like, which argument resonates more with you? What do you make of that whole internal party debate?
Well, first of all, the reality of oligarchy in America and the growing danger of a deepening of oligarchy and the emergence of fascism, we have to start with that. That's my worldview. I'm not a sky is falling guy. I do not believe our democracy is over today. I think there's plenty of fight left. 5 million people in 2,100 cities on Saturday. That was an amazing no kings protests everywhere. The right wing can't do that. Progressives can do that. Democrats can do that. And we've just begun that fight against fascism. And I believe there will be a deeper fight against oligarchy. But I want to level set. Yeah, we have an oligarchy problem, to say the least. Here's what I would frame the housing debate as. It's a fallacy to believe, if you just opened up everything and said, let the free market do its thing, no holds barred. It's insane to believe that would serve the interests of working people per se, because the housing market, like everything else in a free enterprise system, tends towards the wealthiest and the most lucrative opportunities. But just working people, 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, who can barely make ends meet, up into folks who used to think they were middle class and are struggling each month just to pay the bills. That whole swath of people, that majority of New Yorkers, they're not going to get housing that they need simply by letting the free market do its thing. So let's be honest. You need tough rules that make the private sector build affordable housing. We did a lot of that. We found it was very effective. You need things like rent regulation, which is something that does work in New York City. Could it be improved upon? Absolutely. There are some examples in rent regulation, honestly, of overreach, and you might even call it liberal overreach. I'm not going to bullshit about that. But still, the basic concept that you need rent regulation in a place like New York City, I think, has been proven over and over again as the reason why this place still has a working class and a middle class. You need public housing. I wish we could go and do new and better public housing. Maybe one day we can. But all of those pieces, the subsidies to keep people in their current apartments, like that's the only way you're going to reach a lot of people. Now, I can also tell you, yeah, there's some regulation that's stupid, unquestionably. There's some processes that take too long. I agree with that. We have to be honest. There's, on the one hand, part of why things take so long to build America is things like good environmental regulations and good labor standards and safety standards. Amen. And then in a place like New York, yeah, there's definitely some red tape we don't need. There's definitely some streamlining. You don't need to be an abundance apologist to say some of this could be done better. And it would help build some housing that could at least reach middle-class people. So why don't we do all of the above? Like, we need a very muscular public sector affordable housing policy. We can do some things to help the private sector build more housing, some of which hopefully will be for working people and middle-class people. And much of the solution historically has been at the state and federal level. There's still, in New York State, there's still things that could be done. Federal level, we're screwed for a while. Let's be honest. I mean, we had a shining moment with Biden, with his vision, to his credit, of infrastructure and Build Back Better and what he did with stimulus and all the pieces that actually were starting to turn what had been, decades of disinvestment in affordable housing at the federal level. It was starting to turn, got stopped. That's a fight we need to resume when we get back to the White House and get back to Congress.
Final question is a political question. When are you launching the Bill de Blasio for Senate primary campaign against Chuck Schumer? This is a question of one. I haven't heard from lots of people. This is just, I figured I should ask any New York Politico this question, because I know there's a lot of discontent out there with Chuck Schumer. But in all seriousness, what's next for you? Is there another ride in politics for you? I mean, you were mayor of New York. Yeah, you ran for president. Like, for people who are wondering, what's next for you? What is next for you?
Thank you for asking. Of course, anyone who's served in public service, it's nice for someone to ask if there's a future. I don't know if there's a political future. I certainly am not banking on that. I would love to serve in a Democratic administration when, and I believe the word is when, we get back to the White House. I'd love to work on something like making pre-K for all a national reality. That's, one of the things that would be most profound for this country in terms of addressing income inequality and putting money back in working people's pockets and opening up much better futures for kids would be if we did early childhood education everywhere. And just a quick point, the science tells us children's minds develop between birth and 5. When does mandatory public education start in America? 6, right? So we have this amazing opportunity to do something big and transcendent and progressive. I'd love to work on that. Let's see if that opportunity occurs. But in the meantime, I hope to use my voice for whatever way I can to point out that this status quo is 100% not acceptable and doesn't have to be this way. And David, I appreciate your voice and your work. I know we're very kindred in this sense. After all the struggles people have been put through, we still have to come back to this fundamental reality and say out loud, the emperor has no clothes. This status quo is broken. We should not accept it. We don't have to accept it. It can be changed. We can do big things still. And I hope this primary in New York City starts to show that once again. But whatever the outcome, your point earlier, progressives come into office, they do big things, and then suddenly there's this systematic attempt to erase it from history. Well, at least I can say from my own experience, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, thank you for pre-K for all, thank you for 3K for all, it changed our lives. It's the only reason we could afford to live in this city. We need to get these accomplishments to show people change can happen, and then we need to build on them, and we need to keep coming back and coming back. And the right wing sometimes believes their own hype, and they think maybe they can head fake us or depress us or make us go away or put us back in our shell. Well, go watch the movie Spartacus, for God's sakes. We were never going away. We've been here not only for centuries. The progressive impulse for fairness and equality and respecting people and trying to give people a decent life, that goes back millennia. And it's not going anywhere. Even with Donald Trump and MAGA, we're not going anywhere. And we saw it on Saturday, 2,100 locations around the country. So I just hope people always remember, we will keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. And one day we're going to win a bigger victory.
Well, I'm glad to see that this New York race, honestly, I mean, one takeaway for me is I'm glad to see this New York race competitive. I'm glad to see that no matter what happens in the election, that a lot of what you laid the groundwork for and what progressives laid the groundwork for is now not at the fringe of the biggest mayor's race in America. It's at the center of the discussion.
Amen.
Even though the most powerful people in the world, many of whom are there, don't want those issues and that discussion to be anywhere near the discourse. So I think that is a real testament to your work, a lot of testament to people before you, right? I mean, this all builds upon everything prior to it. And so the fact that it's even been a race, I've said it on social media, the fact that this race wasn't just bought, right? Just like Andrew Cuomo and the Legion of Doom come in, buy it, it's not even a real race. The fact that it's even competitive is a really, truly, genuinely encouraging thing at a time when it feels like most political outcomes are already predetermined by money. So I hope you're feeling good about it, because just about where that is right now. And as I said, I'm sure a lot of people are coming up to you, certainly after Eric Adams and what's happened since you've left, saying they're loving you now. So Mayor Bill de Blasio, thanks so much.
Thank you, brother. You take care.